to Demystifying DMARC. This talk is going to go over exactly what DMARC is, why you should deploy it, best practices, things to avoid, and the fun you might encounter within your own organization as you start to deploy this. So, a brief history of email. So, the first email standards were published in 1982. The first anti-spoofing standard, SPF, wasn't introduced until 2006, and then you have DMARC, which actually provides enforcement for SPF and DKIM in 2015. So you have 9 years between the standard that 9 years between SPF and DMARC, whereas SPF provides a mechanism that kind of sort of prevents spoofing, although it's easy to bypass, and I'll show you that in a minute, to a mechanism like DMARC where it actually enforces. So all the way from 1982 up to 2015, people could spoof very easily without any kind of technical resistance. And so that means attackers do this a lot, but it also means that your business, your organizations, your NGOs, whoever you represent, may also have picked up spoofing or uses a vendor that uses spoofing for legitimate purposes, because it was such a common thing to do, and still is a very common thing to do. So the idea with DMARC is that you have two authentication mechanisms for email, SPF and DKIM, and they check different things. They actually check different phone addresses than what the user sees. So the idea with DMARC is that the mechanisms that SPF and DKIM are checking should match the same thing that the user's checking when they see the phone address in the email there. And another really cool feature of DMARC is you get a visual of all the different email senders that are sending as your domain. So all those different third-party services, all those different shadow IT, marketing services, anything that's sending as your domain, that's sending to a recipient mail system that honors DMARC, you'll see that traffic. And it also benefits the end recipients, the end users too, because once you get into an enforcement state with DMARC, you're preventing malicious spoofing from reaching those end users. So it's got benefits both for the domain owners, your IT infrastructure people, your information security people. It's got benefits for your email marketing team because it's making sure that they follow best practices from a technical standpoint, and your marketing email is less likely to end up in spam, so your email marketing people love this. So it's a win-win for everybody. And because it has so many benefits, it's been gaining adoption even before it was really a finalized standard. As with a lot of things with information security, the financial services industry kind of led the way, followed by there was a DHS binding operational directive in October 2017. So that applies to all executive branch level agencies except the military and intelligence communities, although from what recon I've done on those domains, they've started to adopt it as well. And then the healthcare industry, the NHISAC, or now known as the HISAC, the healthcare ISAC, really started pushing this in the healthcare industry in 2017. And NIST actually, just within this last month, published an extensive paper on exactly how to deploy DMARC that I've only had a chance to skim through, but it looks really well done. So DMARC is only really useful if people on both sides of the email transaction are using it, in that you as a domain owner have published a DMARC record, and the recipient mail system is also checking for and honoring DMARC. The good news is a lot of email recipients are already checking DMARC even if they don't know it. Pretty much every one of the consumer email services, every one of the major cloud email services, plus a bunch of large players in various industries as they adopt DMARC. They're also making sure, of course, their mail system is checking DMARC. So your steps to start to deploy DMARC, the very first thing you want to do is make sure that your email gateways are configured to check DMARC and start honoring DMARC, so that way organizations that have already deployed DMARC and are protecting their domains, like banks or other organizations that you partner with, you're getting protected from malicious actors spoofing those domains. Even if you don't have DMARC deployed on your domain yet, just turning on checking on your gateways provides benefits. And like I said, if you're already using a cloud email service, it's likely already checking DMARC for you. The next step is to inventory all of your domains, which if you're in a large organization, one that has many different domains or maybe grows by acquisition, you may have more domains than you thought. So there are lots of different ways to collect information about what domains you have in your environment. The first option listed there, if you happen to use Windows Server as your organization's name server, you can use that PowerShell snippet to dump a list of all DNS zones, all domains that are hosted by those name servers. You can also use the Whois XML API service. It's pretty reasonably priced. You can just kind of do pay-as-you-go queries on that and do reverse lookups on Whois data, on the NS records, so which name servers are hosting it, or even which mail servers they point to. So that way you can find, if say, for example, if somebody is using a third-party registrar but is still pointing to your infrastructure, you can still find that domain by doing these reverse lookups. So the next step, after you've identified all of your domains, is to deploy an SPF record. Now, most domains should already have an SPF record deployed, because a lot of email services like Gmail will start rate limiting you and treating you as spam if you don't have one of these records in place. But there are still a lot of organizations with really old domains out there that still don't have an SPF record deployed. But really the most basic SPF record you can deploy for a domain that does send email is that record right there, where you're just saying, yes, I'm authorizing explicitly my Amex records, my mail servers send mail on behalf of this domain. Everything else is a soft fail. It's kind of, I don't really know one way or the other what third parties we have. So if you don't already have an SPF record, that's a great one to start with. Then for everything that you know for a fact doesn't send email, so let's say you've got park domains, you purposely purchased typo-squatted domains and domains with different TLDs, and you know those domains should never ever have email sent as those domains, you can set SPF-all, which says no email should come from this domain. And if you happen to see a DNS record in your DNS that says SPF 2.0, that's not actually SPF. That's something called sender ID, which totally doesn't factor into this. It was a different standard for addressing the spoofing issue, which wasn't really widely adopted. I just have it in there because the records start with SPF 2.0. Might confuse some folks. So some common mistakes when you're putting in your SPF record, you might notice that you've got include statements in your SPF record. It's pretty common if you've got third-party mail services that you'll have an include statement where you're basically telling DNS, include this other domain's SPF record. Well, to prevent DDoS attacks, the standard itself actually limits you to 10 DNS lookups. Not just 10 includes, but 10 DNS lookups that can result as a SPF lookup for a single domain. So that you can actually hit that pretty quickly. So you can't just rely on SPF. That's why DMARC also allows authorization through DKIM, because you're not going to be able to authorize all your email under SPF for a variety of reasons. But just to give you an idea of the effects of different organizations trying to promote SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, whether it's through regulations, whether it's through industry bodies, the effect of these standards going into place at larger organizations has been positive. OPM, if you don't know who they are the federal government's HR department, and they're also responsible for keeping track of security clearances and that kind of information. So they have some pretty sensitive data, so it's, it'd be good to make sure nobody could spoof them. But their SPF record before the DHS Binding Operational Directive went into effect was a bit of a mess. They have lots of includes there. I have monster.com highlighted because I really don't know why monster.com would need to spoof opm.gov. And that mass360.info, at least at the time I checked it, that domain didn't exist. So theoretically, you could register that domain and include whatever you want, and then DHS was including it. And then on top of all that, it was way too many includes for that SPF record to be valid anyway. But then after the requirements of the regulation went into effect, after the requirements of the regulation went into effect, the record got much shorter, much more accurate, and it actually functions because it doesn't have all those includes in there. So it worked a lot better. So the regulations are having the desired effect.
Well, what if you have more than 10 IP ranges?
More than 10 include. You can include as many IP ranges as you want. It's the number of DNS lookups.
I get you. Okay.
It's the number of DNS lookups.
Okay.
And the idea is that you don't want to have too many, because then theoretically you could set up your own. If they didn't have that 10 lookup limit, you could set up your own domain with a ridiculously long SPF record, and then send a bunch of email to a target organization and just have their mail servers churning all day long with DNS requests and end up DDoSing them. So some things to watch out for when you're deploying when you're altering your DNS record. Depending on who your registrar is, I found that certain registrars will put placeholder MX records and placeholder SPF records in place for you automatically when you register a domain. And even if they don't show that any records are listed under a domain in like the domain admin portal, don't believe them. Check. Do DNS queries yourself, because sometimes they have implicit defaults that they use to train their own spam filters. So they say, oh, if you're not using this to receive email, we'll put our own MX record there, and even though no email should be sent here, we'll just collect that for spam collection. And the problem with that is, again, if somebody's typing your domain and they hit one of your park domains and they're trying to get a hold of you with some sensitive email, that could be going to your registrar's mail server, and not yours. So even if you don't accept mail for that domain, at least have it pointing to your MX records so you can properly balance it yourself. So one thing I didn't understand when I was first really digging into this and reading through the RFCs, I thought, well, isn't SPF supposed to take care of all the spoofing business? And turns out it's really easy to bypass. And I have an example of it here. So it's probably difficult to see up there on the projector, but in the screenshot there, I have a telnet session that I opened up with Office 365's mail server, and just over plain text, and I'm using SMTP over plain text over telnet to send an email to spoof an email, because SPF relies on the from domain in the SMTP transaction, not the email. So that means that I can put whatever I want in the SMTP transaction. There I'm putting in evil@infosexspeakeasy.org, and infosexspeakeasy.org is a domain that I control. So that's the domain that the mail server is going to check. Okay, what's your SPF record for that? And of course, my own evil mail server is going to list that as an authorized mail server, and SPF is going to go, okay, you're good, you pass. Whereas the user's looking at what's in the message from header, and that's admin@sensykitchenbath.com. That's a real domain. It was the only domain that I think I could get away with spoofing because it's my uncle's small business. So that's what I ended up spoofing. And here's my spoofed email. Now you'll notice Office 365 called it out as possible phishing, and that's not because of anything that I did wrong with the spoof. It's that it's the most obvious phish in the world. I said, please reset your password with some random Google short link. It's detecting it as phishing based on the content of the message, not necessarily that it was spoofed. And just in case you're curious, here's where that link led to. Okay, that's really loud. So, turns out, DKIM, you can do something very similar where you can put in whatever domain you want, and that's the domain that'll get checked. So, there's a DKIM record, and in bold there you see example.net, and you put in whatever domain you want, and that's the domain that gets checked for DKIM, which doesn't, again, necessarily have to match what the user's seeing. So, there are actually 3 different from addresses. SPF checks the SMTP mail from header in the SMTP transaction that the user never ever sees because the SMTP transaction is going on between mail servers. DKIM checks the domain in the D tag, and then the user is seeing what's in the message body. What DMARC brings to the table is making sure that, okay, if DKIM or SPF pass, the domains that they're checking have to match at least the same base domain as what the user's seeing, because that's what we care about, because that's what's going to get spoofed. So that's the key difference of DMARC, or what DMARC adds on top of SPF and DKIM. So, technically, you could have DMARC with either SPF or DKIM passing, but DKIM is much, much better than SPF. So if you would have more than 10 includes, don't worry about it. If that vendor supports DKIM, which most do, you don't have to worry about including that in your SPF record. As long as they can properly DKIM sign as your domain, and you publish that key in your DNS record, you're good. The problem with only relying on SPF and not DKIM is that, remember, SPF relies on the SMTP transaction. So that changes once, if that email gets relayed by another server or gets forwarded by a mailbox rule, that address is going to change and it won't match up anymore. So as soon as mail gets forwarded, that SPF alignment is what DMARC terms, what it's checking to make sure that the SMTP header is in alignment with the message header domain. If that message gets forwarded by another organization, say, somebody's got, somebody switched from Yahoo to Gmail back in the day, but they never bothered updating their contact information because they've got a forwarding rule that's been in place for years and they totally forgot about it. Or, from a business perspective, an M&A could have happened. Lots of different reasons that mail gets legitimately forwarded. But only DKIM is the only authentication mechanism that survives message forwarding because it travels as a message header. So as that message gets properly forwarded, that signature travels with the message. And a quick way to check and see if you are properly DKIM signing your mail and that your third-party services are properly DKIM signing your mail is if you can send it to Gmail. Most other major mail services have something similar, but Gmail makes it real easy. You just click on that little arrow underneath the from address and it gives you the technical details. And you can see that it was signed by that domain and that those two domains match, meaning that message would pass DMARC if that domain had DMARC deployed, and that particular domain does, by the way. One quick note with DKIM that again is something that I only noticed because I read through the RFC. If you're familiar with the way DKIM works, it's kind of got an arbitrary subdomain, they call it the selector, and that's picked by the vendor, and it's usually something generic like S1 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so it's kind of hard to keep track of, looking at your DNS, what key belongs to what vendor, especially when you're wanting to maintain that list or wanting to remove it as you're bringing vendors out or something like that. In the record itself, you can add a key that's n equals, and that's arbitrary text that you can put in there. So you can put the vendor's name in the record itself so that you can keep track of what key is for what vendor, so you can replace keys, roll stuff out as you need to, and it's not really an OPSEC concern because they still have to know what subdomain to look up that record. It's not something that can be easily enumerated like SPF. So when you deploy DMARC, like SPF, you publish a text record at the root of your top-level domain, and you set policy, which is that P equals. Policy is really the only field that's required, but you'll really want to have those other two, the RUA and the RUF. That gives you aggregate data of who's sending email on your behalf, the RUA. The RUF gives you forensics. And I'll get to what's in those reports in a minute. Now, if you've got multiple domains and you're sending the reports to a different domain than the domain that has the DMARC record, you actually need to have this kind of glue record, an authorization record, so that record is required. That way, again, attackers can't just set up their own domain, point it to your inbox, and flood your DMARC reporting inbox with a bunch of fake data. So you've got 3 different policies that you can apply on a DMARC record. None does exactly what you think it would do, which is nothing. It's basically meant for you to have it in like a reporting only mode so that you can collect data, see what's failing, before you go and turning it up to quarantine or reject, so that you can address, okay, this vendor needs to have DKIM turned on, I need to get with the marketing team and make sure MailChimp is properly configured, or whatever it is. And then quarantine, basically the standard says the recipient should treat that with should treat failures with additional suspicion. And as far as what the recipient should do with that, that's up to the recipient. They might send it on through with a warning to the user, they might quarantine it, but reject is a request as the domain owner that says anything that fails should just be flat out rejected by the gateway, don't even give a user a chance to release it, because that's saying with high confidence as the domain owner, I'm the domain owner, any legitimate email that I send should be passing DMARC by this point. Now, I did find one case, one email vendor, Proton Mail, which is actually a pretty security-centric email service, does actually warn users even if the domain is in monitor-only mode, it will warn them if they've got if a domain has a DMARC record with a monitor-only, but that message fails DMARC. And actually, this is, of all things, a retail credit card notice that's legitimate, that failed DMARC, so they're in the process of deploying it, they're in a monitor-only state, but they didn't set up DKIM on Salesforce, so that message is failing DMARC. And you can tell that, by the way, if you ever are curious to see how your mail servers are checking email messages and what domains deploy DMARC, and is your email gateway checking for DMARC. As your email gateways check things like SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, they'll add these authorization results headers to the message. So with that message that failed from that retail credit card, you read the email headers, by the way, from bottom to top. So starting at the bottom, you can see DKIM equals none. They did not have a DKIM signature on that message. SPF, if you see there, SPF did pass, but the mail from domain in the SMTP transaction was a Salesforce address, not the credit card companies or the retailer's domain. So it didn't match. So that's why it failed DMARC. Now you might be wondering, why would they keep a Salesforce address in the SMTP mail from anyway? And the reason for that is that SMTP mail from address in the SMTP transaction, that's where your bounce backs go. So Salesforce keeps track of those bounce backs on purpose so that way they've got a clean mailing list. So that way they know, okay, what email addresses are no longer valid or weren't valid to begin with, so they're not sending out mail pointlessly to bad addresses. So the way that this would be resolved and this message would pass DMARC is for them to just deploy DKIM on Salesforce, have their messages signed, and then publish the public key to their DNS for that retailer's domain. But you can see with the top header with the DMARC check, it even tells you their current policy, P equals none, so they're in a monitor-only state, and the disposition, DISP, is none, so the mail server didn't do anything to the message. It's honoring that DMARC policy. So even on just the individual recipient side of things, just in your own email, you can start digging through these headers and start seeing, okay, how are these mail servers checking these mechanisms, and who's got DMARC deployed? So one thing, if you're reading through the RFC, you'll find that there's an option called PCT, or short for percent. And it might sound good at first, but it's actually a really, really bad idea to set this. It's implicitly set at 100%. And the idea is that whatever percentage you set it to, That's the percentage that the receiving mail server is going to apply the policy to. Now that percentage is up to the individual receiving mail server. So if I've got a policy set, I have no idea how much of my mail, if it's failing DMARC, how much of my mail is actually going to be eaten by that. It's some arbitrary percentage. So it's just a really bad option to set it to. Well, some enterprising person at a redacted.gov figured out that they can meet the requirement of setting a quarantine or reject policy, but just set the percentage to 0, and then effectively have a monitor-only policy. But look, we've got it set to quarantine, so we're in compliance. Not really. So there are 2 different tools that you can use to check SPF records and DMARC records on domains. I wrote one just because I was really curious to check a bunch of different domains in bulk, from Fortune 500 to top government domains and things like that. And then DHS wrote one called Trust Email that specifically checks to see if domains are in compliance with their regulations, but it's also a good one to see. Both scripts now will actually check Start TLS too, so they'll check to make sure that you are have opportunistic encryption enabled in your database, which you really should. So both scripts will check more things than just SPF and DMARC, and we'll just check your email best practices in general. So when you deploy DMARC, I kind of mentioned this a little bit already, you can get 2 types of reports back: aggregate and forensic. Now, theoretically, somebody could check DMARC and not send either of these reports out back to the domain owner. But in practice, being a good net citizen, pretty much everybody who checks DMARC sends out aggregate reports. Very few send out forensic reports for privacy reasons. And even if you do get forensic reports back that contain the email that failed, it might just be the headers only and none of the body content. Again, for privacy reasons, because they don't want potentially sensitive emails going to third parties, even if that's email administrators. So aggregate reports are actually XML documents, and they're pretty readable individually, honestly. But when you get a ton of them every 24 hours, you need some way of aggregating and visualizing that data. And especially when different industries and the government started requiring that these standards be put in place, lo and behold, a bunch of vendors popped up to offer these services. And some of them are very reasonably priced, some of them are very astronomically priced, and they all more or less do the same thing, honestly. But it really bothered me that there were all these companies that were kind of taking advantage of something that was a requirement or regulation to do, and is a really good best practice. As you can see, the effects of the regulation over time. So the DHS regulation that required DMARC to be put into place required all federal domains to have DMARC in monitor-only mode by January 15th, 2018. I did my reconnaissance a little after that, towards the end of January, and then I did a follow-up just a few weeks ago. Now, by October 16th, 2018, according to the regulation. All those domains were supposed to be at reject, and you can see that there's still plenty. If it says empty on that chart, that means they didn't have the DMARC. They still have the DMARC record deployed at all. But you can see that the overwhelming majority of the domains have met the requirement. And by the way, I only saw like 2 or 3 domains use that cheating tactic of setting quarantine or reject, but setting the percentage to 0. So the majority of the domains are actually in compliance for real. But it really bothered me that I was looking around for an open source solution. So I'm like, this is an open standard. This is a data processing problem. This really shouldn't be this difficult, and I shouldn't have to pay a ton of money to get this done. But I couldn't find anything. So I made one. And this is a script called parse DMARC. And what it does is it can take a bunch of those forensic or aggregate reports in, can either take them in file format, or it can monitor a mailbox. So remember, you point your DMARC record at a mailbox, and that's where you collect your reports. And so this script, what it'll do is it'll take those reports as they come in, process them, and then spit them out either into ELK or into Splunk. So if you've got either one of those set up already, and if you're not familiar with ELK, it's an open source data aggregation and visualization platform. A lot of people use it for
free Splunk, basically.
Yes, exactly. Free Splunk, pretty much. And honestly, the dashboards are a lot more interactive than Splunk.
Is that RRD tool based, or what you use to make the?
That's just Kibana.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yep, that's just Kibana. So yeah, the script itself that I wrote is Python, and it just basically takes everything in XML, pretties it up a little bit, does some additional work like reverse DNS lookups and things like that that aren't in the report, does it some additional legwork, then spits all that out in JSON, and it can actually spit out to ELK and to Splunk concurrently. So if you're using both for whatever reason, you can. It can also spit out the results in an email report if you'd rather see the whole thing as a giant CSV. It can do that too. And I pretty much said all the features already, but yeah, it's totally open source. I've been working on this for better part of a year now, and it is very, very stable. I run this in production every day. I've gotten plenty of bug reports and fixes and improvements from the community. It's just been awesome about this. So it is in a very stable, very usable state, and you can get some very, very interesting data out of this, which I'll give you an example of. So again, this is Kibana. The first screenshot you saw was kind of the upper part of the dashboard. It's kind of good for like your metrics that you would show maybe at the front of your sock. But this is where the meat of the data comes in. So, and I apologize, all of this is redacted because this actually comes from production data. But the column all the way on the left is your different reporting organizations and the volume of email that those reporting organizations are seeing from all of your domains that you've got coming in. So, as you can see, it's very high volumes of email are coming in. And you can see that most major email providers are there unredacted. The ones that are redacted are industry specific. And in the center, my script does so the aggregate DMARC data gives you a few things. It tells you the source IP address of the email, the volume of the email, so the number of emails that come in, and whether that particular amount of email passed SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. That's what it gives you. what my script does then is it takes that source IP address, does a reverse lookup on it, and then figures out what is the base domain of that reverse lookup, so that way you can see in bulk which providers are sending as you, and if they're passing. And then the ones that's totally redacted all the way there on the right is all the different domains that I'm collecting data on behalf of. So those are the domains that my organization owns that are being monitored or protected by DMARC. So something funny, when I was building this slide deck a while back, something funny I noticed, and like any good dashboard, it has pew-pew maps. And something funny that I noticed was, that's Iran. Why is Iran spoofing me? And so I was kind of curious, and let me dig more into this data. And so there's the IP address, and like I said, my script does reverse DNS lookups. When I saw this reverse DNS, I about did a triple take and then about fell out of my chair laughing and then had to double check this data. Sure enough, this is legit. The reverse DNS of that IP address is 2.stupid.2.configure.reverse.dns. And that is from the mobile communication company of Iran. The only thing I can figure is that maybe somebody had some sort of MMS conversation going on, but somebody over in Iran, some DNS admin at the mobile communication company of Iran has a great sense of humor. So things to watch out for when you're deploying DMARC is there's a monitor-only stage for a reason, and like many other security controls, you got to make sure everything's tuned and everything's in place before you go tightening it down. And one nice thing about DMARC is you have all the data that you need. Third-party senders, a lot of them will DKIM sign, but they'll DKIM sign in their own domain, not as your domain, at least by default, until you go in and you configure DKIM signing for your domain. What they'll usually do, the usual process is they'll generate a private key that they'll keep, and they'll start signing your email, but then they'll give you a public key that then you publish on your DNS because you're the domain owner, and that's how you validate that, yes, this email came from me. So make sure they're signing as you, not as them. And sometimes these vendors actually don't know the names of these standards, they just know it as email authentication, or that's what's in their knowledge base. So sometimes just call it that, or just call it all the different names that it's known by, and maybe that'll perk up their ears on one of them. So a common question is, you're going to find third-party senders that don't do things the way they should, that either don't DKIM sign properly, or they don't have their SPF doing my dishes, and what you can do with that is you can have them send from the subdomain, because a lot of times these vendors are sending from like a no reply, an address that isn't real, so it really doesn't matter what they're sending as. So you can have them send from no reply at alerts.example.com. Just have them send from a subdomain, and then you can apply a DMARC monitor-only policy to just that subdomain. So that way, your top-level domain and all your other subdomains are still protected, but you can make an exception just for this one sender as long as they're sending as that subdomain. So you're not waiting on one vendor that's holding up your whole process for protecting the rest of your domain. Mailing lists is another area where people get nervous about DMARC. Best practice for the mailing list is to not alter anything and just keep the email as is. Don't change any of the headers. Don't change any of the body. But in practice, a lot of times they'll add their own footers, their own subject tags, things like that. So in practice, what these mailing lists need to do is configure their mailing list. And you can do this with Mailman, with Listserv, with all the common mailing lists, is to configure them to replace the from address with the from address of the list if the original from address uses DMARC, so that way they're not spoofing. The biggest DMARC challenges aren't technical, they're organizational. Because you'll get a list of third-party services and which ones are passing and failing to do what they need to do. The tricky part is figuring out, okay, who in my organization has MailChimp login? Who the heck uses, X service, and who has admin rights to that to configure the service? Because you might have documentation that shows that they can support DMARC and configure properly. But tracking down exactly who has that access, that might be your difficulty. So, best advice I can give you to make DMARC deployment easier is when you're looking at your aggregate data, make a list of all your legitimate services, or at least things that look like they're legitimate to you, and kind of list out, okay, who might own this? Then get the documentation together for each service about how to properly configure this, and then get that information to the account owner to properly configure this. So, this might make your email team nervous, it might make your marketers nervous, anybody that's got a stakeholder making sure that email gets delivered reliably. And what you need to communicate is there are no unknown unknowns with this. You have all the data you need, and when you're done with it, your email is going to be a lot more trustworthy, and your delivery rates are going to be a lot better. And you can have proof of that in the before and after that you get from your aggregate data. So, with that, questions? And by the way, that link there is a link to my blog post. And if you can't see that link or get a good view of that link, if you just Google the name of this talk, Demystifying DMARC, that's the name of the blog post, it'll come right up. It has these slides there, and pretty much any information that I could think of, details that I didn't have time to include in this talk. Anything else, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I think I read your article before. When the company was trying to do that. Sender domains, I didn't realize in a large company that would end up with that people always go to